Carl Jung discovered that men who abstained from intimacy for 90 days experienced something so profound, so transformative, that it changed how they saw reality itself. They reported supernatural levels of focus, an almost magnetic presence that drew people to them, and creative breakthroughs that seemed to come from another dimension. But here's what Jung found most disturbing. Most men will never experience this because they're too terrified of what they might discover about themselves when they stop running from their own mind. Every ancient civilization knew something we've forgotten. The Spartans before battle, the samurai during training, monks across every religion, even geniuses like Tesla and Newton, they all understood that your most powerful energy can either scatter you across 1,000 distractions or concentrate into something that makes you virtually unstoppable. Carl Jung spent decades studying this phenomenon. He observed that certain men seemed to possess an almost otherworldly level of focus, creativity, and magnetic presence, while others drifted through life in a constant fog of mental noise and emotional chaos. What separated these two groups wasn't intelligence, wasn't background, wasn't even talent. Jung discovered that the difference came down to one fundamental principle about how we direct our most primal energy. He found that when this energy is consciously redirected rather than unconsciously dispersed, it doesn't just change what you can accomplish, it changes who you become at the deepest level. But here's what Jung found most fascinating. This transformation follows a predictable pattern, with specific stages and timeline that he documented across hundreds of cases. The knowledge exists, the roadmap is clear, yet most men will never access this power because they're not willing to pay the price that every warrior, every genius, every spiritual master throughout history has paid. In this video, you're going to get Jung's exact blueprint for redirecting this energy. I'm going to take you through the 3 brutal phases every man faces and why most quit before they experience the real transformation. You'll discover what separates the men who unlock extraordinary focus and presence from those who remain trapped in cycles of distraction and mediocrity. By the end, you'll have the roadmap, but whether you use it or not, that's entirely up to you. There's a shift that no one warns men about. It doesn't come with a dramatic announcement or some grand inner awakening. It comes with silence. When the pursuit of sex suddenly stops, whether through intention, rejection, or exhaustion, it doesn't create peace. It creates a vacuum. That vacuum feels disorienting. A man might expect clarity or calm, but what arrives is a strange kind of weightlessness. Without the chase, without the flirty texts, the validation, the pull of anticipation, time stretches. Days feel different. There's no reward to look forward to, no target to focus energy on. And in that moment, the rhythm that used to keep him moving begins to break. This is the first quiet after years of noise. Not external noise, but the hum of constant sexual orientation, subtle, unspoken, ever present. It shaped his thoughts, his movements, even the way he dressed or walked into a room. When it's gone, the machinery slows, and that's when he notices the stillness. Carl Jung spoke of libido as more than sex, it's psychic energy. And when that energy is no longer outwardly expressed, the man begins to feel it bottling up with nowhere obvious to go. But this isn't transformation yet. This is just the threshold, a psychological pause. What happens next depends on what the man does with the silence. Most try to escape it. Few are brave enough to stay inside it. When the sexual rhythm disappears, the first thing to fracture isn't the body, it's the persona, the social self, the projected mask a man has worn so long he's forgotten it was ever a performance. For years, maybe decades, that mask was shaped by the pursuit of being attractive, of being desirable, of being chosen. Without that dynamic, the ego begins to unravel. This collapse doesn't look dramatic on the surface. There's no thunderclap, no visible breakdown. It's quieter than that. It's the sudden discomfort in your own clothes. The realization that the jokes you used to tell don't land the same. The emptiness in a mirror that once reflected someone you liked. Jung understood the persona as necessary, a bridge between the self and society. But he also warned against identifying too deeply with it. Because once that mask becomes the man, any threat to it feels like death. And when sex disappears, that identity starts to rot. The man isn't getting the same looks. He's not performing the same rituals. The validation circuit breaks. This is the moment many men panic. They start grasping old habits, old flings, quick fixes, anything to keep the mask alive. But for the conscious man, this collapse isn't failure, it's exposure. It shows him how much of his identity was dependent on being wanted. And in that raw space, he faces a deeper question. Who am I when I'm no longer being chosen? Once the mask begins to crack, the symptoms arrive, suddenly, violently, and without apology. They aren't logical, they aren't polite, they hit like withdrawal because that's exactly what they are. Sex, for many men, was never just about release. It was regulation, dopamine management, emotional distraction, a way to feel desirable without needing to feel vulnerable. When that's gone, the nervous system doesn't calmly adapt, it revolts. The rage comes first, short fuses, snapping at people for no reason. Feeling like the world owes you something and no one is delivering. But underneath that rage sits something worse. Emptiness. Not the poetic kind, the cold kind. Days feel slow. Motivation dries up. Nothing seems exciting anymore. It's not depression exactly, but it's close. It's the moment when the mind realizes its favorite drugs, which are attention, arousal, and approval, aren't coming back. Then come the cravings. Not just for sex, but for the little rituals that surrounded it. The scrolling, the fantasies, the flirting, the performance. These cravings aren't about lust, they're about control. The mind wants to reassert its power. It wants to escape the silence, to reset the old cycle, to feel something, anything, familiar. Carl Jung might call this the return of the shadow. The darker, disowned parts of the psyche rise, not to torment, but to integrate. But integration only begins when the man stops reaching for the old fix and starts facing the discomfort for what it truly is, a sign that the real transformation hasn't started yet, but it's coming. When the distractions are stripped away, what's left isn't peace, it's exposure. Most men think they're avoiding lust by living without sex, but abstinence doesn't kill lust, it drags it out of the shadows. And once it's no longer being acted out, it starts to mutate, becoming more raw, more honest, and far more dangerous. It's here the man meets the beast within. Not a monster, not a villain, but a part of himself he's spent years trying to dominate or deny. Lust isn't just about desire, it's tied to power, to longing, to buried shame. And when it surges without a physical outlet, it exposes fractures in the man's sense of self. Who is he without conquest, without affirmation, without that small thrill of being wanted? Alongside lust comes fear, not of others, but of what's rising inside. Fear of losing control, fear of what abstinence might reveal, fear that without sex he might be nothing. And underneath that fear lies the deepest wound, fractured masculinity. The man realizes that much of what he called strength was just socially rewarded performance. But the power he thought he had was dependent on being seen, not on actually being sovereign. Jung's shadow isn't evil, it's power left unclaimed. And to claim it, a man must first stop pretending he's only composed of strength and virtue. That's when integration begins, not by suppressing those impulses, but by naming them, owning them, and refusing to flinch. At first, loneliness feels like silence. But with time, it begins to speak. Most men think they can handle being alone. They confuse solitude with freedom. But when abstinence stretches out and the external affirmations go quiet, a different kind of loneliness shows up. The kind that isn't about the absence of people, but the absence of self. This is where the mirror appears. Not the physical mirror, but the psychological one. The one that reflects back all the questions he spent years avoiding. What do I actually want? Who am I when no one's watching? Have I built a life that's real, or one that's just reactive? Without sex, without flirting, without the distractions of ego-driven validation, a man starts to see himself, not as a performer, not as a provider, not as a protector, but as a person. And often he doesn't like what he sees. The ambition feels hollow. The strength feels performative. The personality feels patched together from expectation and survival. It's not failure, it's exposure. Carl Jung wrote that loneliness does not come from having no people around, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important. In this silence, a man realizes he's never even communicated those things to himself. This is the turning point, because only when he confronts that reflection, raw, unedited, uncomfortable, can something more authentic begin to take shape. When a man cuts off sex, the silence doesn't just expose weakness, it provokes rebellion. At first, the body shuts down, no desire, no fire. But eventually, something older stirs. Not emotional need, instinct. The primitive force buried under years of social polish, discipline, and moral framing. It doesn't ask politely, it growls. This is when abstinence turns dangerous, not to others, but to the man himself. Because the self-image he's protected, calm, composed, rational, starts to crack. The hunger returns, but not just for sex, for risk, for danger, for the thrill of being alive. This isn't regression, it's confrontation. The civilized man meets the buried animal, and he realizes for years he wasn't transcending his instincts, he was sedating them. Jung warned that anything unconscious will surface as fate. Repressed desire doesn't vanish, it mutates. It leaks through moods, sabotages relationships, hijacks thoughts. But when faced consciously, it becomes fuel. The inner rebel doesn't want chaos, he wants truth. He wants power reclaimed from shame. And abstinence, if endured, becomes the trial by which the man learns to own this force, without being owned by it. Not every man survives this phase. The weak ones relapse. The strong ones reshape. The energy didn't disappear, it just stopped chasing what couldn't satisfy it. What we call sexual energy is just one expression of something deeper. Libido in the Jungian sense. A psychic force. Raw vitality, the will to expand, build, penetrate reality itself. When a man stops wasting it in the loop of craving and release, it doesn't vanish, it turns restless. That restlessness is sacred. At first, it's unbearable. He wants to go back, find relief, numb the charge. But if he resists the fall, something clicks. He starts to see possibilities in unexpected places. The discipline to finish what he starts, the drive to build something lasting, the courage to do the hard thing instead of the easy one. This is transmutation. Sex was never the real goal, it was the shortcut. The goal was intensity, creation, conquest, recognition, transcendence. Sex delivered a glimpse, purpose gives permanence. So he begins to rewire. The energy that once searched for bodies now fuels structure, projects, training, creation, legacy. Jung wrote, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of its parents." A man who fails to redirect his libido ends up living in half-light, never fully ruined, but never fully alive. But the one who learns to turn that fire inward becomes dangerous, in the best way possible. He's no longer just abstaining. He's building something that no orgasm could ever give him, immortality through impact. When a man stops spending his energy chasing women, something radical happens. He starts building. Sublimation, in Jungian terms, isn't repression, it's refinement. It's the process of channeling base drives, sex, rage, hunger into elevated forms, art, leadership, discipline, vision. The same fire that once consumed him now becomes fuel. But only if he has the spine to hold it. Most men never make it that far. They loop, crave, chase, release. Pleasure becomes their ceiling. But the few who resist that pull, who stare down the temptation and don't flinch, gain access to a different kind of power. Not power over others, power over self. That's the foundation of every empire. Not just empires of land or capital, but of character, of clarity, of command. History doesn't remember men for how much they consumed, it remembers them for what they constructed. And the blueprint always starts the same way. Abstinence from the trivial, obsession with the essential. Think of it like weaponizing chaos. The urge that once led him to distraction is now the current behind his strategy. The tension doesn't vanish, it sharpens. It carves direction into every hour. It makes his decisions cleaner, his instincts faster, his presence heavier. This is why focused men become dangerous, because the man who learns to sublimate no longer chases pleasure, he commands reality. And when that happens, everything bends toward him, not the other way around. There's a moment when the storm passes, after the cravings, after the rage, after the shadow work. What remains is order, but not the kind that's imposed from outside. This one is earned, fought for, reclaimed. Discipline, in this phase, isn't just habit or routine, it's sovereignty. It means the man no longer negotiates with his lower nature. He doesn't need to argue with lust or beg for focus. He simply acts, because his energy is now tethered to something higher. Before abstinence, control felt like a burden, a cage. But after enduring the fire, discipline becomes freedom. Not because temptation vanished, but because it no longer holds power. The man sees it for what it is, noise, and noise no longer dictates his rhythm. This is when he stops twitching at impulse. The fire's still there, but now it burns on his terms. He is no longer reactive, no longer volatile, no longer at the mercy of urges. He has structure. He has order. He has direction. And every act of discipline reinforces that identity. Jung said, in all chaos there is a cosmos, in all disorder, a secret order. That's what abstinence uncovers. Not just restraint, but the man capable of living without constant stimulation. When he controls himself, he controls his time, his choices, his future. And that control doesn't just change him, it terrifies everything that once controlled him. Desire never dies. That's the lie most men cling to when they try to kill it. But sovereignty over urges isn't about starvation, it's about separation. The man who becomes sovereign doesn't stop wanting, he simply refuses to be ruled by what he wants. This is a different kind of power, one that doesn't come from denial, but from clarity. He can look at beauty and not blink. He can feel lust without obeying it, because now he knows the difference between choice and compulsion. Dependence is what happens when desire becomes God. When a man begins to believe that without her, without the thrill, the touch, the high, he's empty. But abstinence reveals the deeper truth. He's not empty, he's distracted. Beneath the noise of craving, there's a will waiting to be tested. And now, it's in control. The sovereign man doesn't shame his sexual appetite. He studies it. He knows what triggers it, what distorts it, and when to let it speak. But he does not bow to it. That's the real shift. It's not abstinence as martyrdom. It's abstinence as mastery. A silent contract with the self that says, I want, but I wait, I feel, but I choose. Carl Jung called it individuation, the moment when a man is no longer possessed by his desires, but instead possesses himself. This is that moment where desire is still alive, but he is no longer its servant. There's a difference between a man who wants attention and a man who commands it. One reaches outward, performing for validation. The other, he says nothing, and yet everything shifts around him. This is masculine magnetism, and it's built in silence. When a man detaches from constant sexual pursuit, something curious happens. He becomes still but not passive. His energy no longer leaks, it consolidates, it thickens. He stops chasing, and that absence of need becomes presence. Women feel it before he speaks, because what they're sensing isn't charm, it's containment. Most men try to attract through action, words, status, gestures. But the sovereign man doesn't project, he radiates. His restraint isn't repression, it's selection. He could move but doesn't. He could speak but waits. That tension, that control, is the very thing that draws others in. This is the kind of force that can't be faked. It comes only after he's starved out the need for applause, affection, and approval. It's not that he doesn't want connection. He just doesn't need it to feel whole. This distinction changes everything. Carl Jung spoke of anima and animus, the unconscious feminine within the man, the masculine within the woman. When a man withdraws from compulsive sexual desires, the polarity sharpens. He no longer overreaches, he anchors, and in doing so, pulls everything else toward him. This is the pull a woman can't explain, not because he tries, but because he doesn't. Self-rule begins when a man stops outsourcing control over his time, his body, his mind. No more compulsive urges driving his choices, no more pretending he's helpless in the face of appetite. This is the return to the inner throne. Most men never sit on it. They pace around it their entire lives, governed by cravings, distractions, and roles they inherited without question. They confuse control with conquest. But to rule the world, a man must first rule himself. The throne isn't about dominance over others. It's about authority within. It's when a man's mind stops interrupting him, when emotion no longer hijacks his choices, when he's no longer at war with his instincts, but no longer enslaved by them either. It's quiet here. Not numb, not bored, still. And in that stillness, a different kind of clarity rises. Not the clarity of answers, but of orientation. He knows who he is, where he stands, and what he serves. Jung would call this the integration of the self, the union of shadow, ego, and spirit. It doesn't make the man perfect, it makes him whole. The man on the inner throne doesn't react, he decides. He doesn't seek control, he embodies it. He is no longer the boy looking for permission. He is the man who gives it to himself. And from here on, everything he does comes from center. Jung never advocated permanent abstinence for everyone. Rather, he saw conscious periods of withdrawal as essential for psychological development, like a musician who must master silence to truly understand sound. The goal isn't to eliminate sexuality from your life forever, but to develop conscious relationship with it, to choose when, how, and with whom you express this energy, rather than being driven by unconscious compulsion. When you eventually return to physical intimacy after a period of conscious abstinence, Jung observed that the experience is qualitatively different. It becomes an expression of consciousness rather than an escape from it, connection rather than consumption, creation rather than depletion. Carl Jung understood something our culture has forgotten, that our relationship with sexual energy is our relationship with life force itself. When we consciously direct this energy, we don't diminish ourselves, we discover ourselves. The title of this video suggests that when the body goes silent, the soul speaks. Jung would say it's not that the soul was silent before, but that we couldn't hear it over the noise of unconscious desire. Abstinence, practiced consciously and temporarily, creates the inner stillness necessary to hear your deeper voice, the voice that knows your true purpose, your authentic desires, your real power, and this can only occur when abstinence is chosen consciously, not imposed through shame or fear. As Jung wrote, "Your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens." The question isn't whether you should practice abstinence, but whether you're ready to discover what emerges when you stop running from yourself and start running toward who you're meant to become. If this exploration of Jung's insights resonated with you, consider what areas of your life might benefit from conscious restraint and redirection of energy. Remember, this isn't about deprivation, it's about transformation. Let me know in the comments. What aspects of Jung's psychology do you want us to explore next? And if you found value in this video, subscribe for more insights into the profound wisdom of depth psychology.